Welcome to Waging War, the podcast where we discuss the battle between truth and lies. We believe that if you know the truth will set you free.
Hello and welcome to Waging War. Today we are going to be hopefully encouraging the family members of people who are struggling with addiction or in recovery. And I have today a dear friend of mine and also the executive assistant of our new clinic, Jennifer Rokisky. She's here to share some experience, strength, and hope that I hope will refresh you and encourage you, especially if you're a family member, give you some wisdom and insight, and share some of her personal experience with her own loved one who struggles with addiction, which is her son. So, Jennifer,
yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so will you just start off by introducing yourself, what you do at Renew, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'm Jennifer Rokisky, and I'm your executive assistant. So we have conversations like this every day.
Yeah,
and I also am the family support coordinator. So I reach out to the families, I encourage the families, and we have a group every Wednesday night for family and friends that have addicted loved ones.
So what are the majority family members that you're seeing? Is it like wives, parents?
I do see a lot of wives that their husbands are struggling. I see parents, sisters I've had in the group. So, you know, unfortunately, addiction doesn't just affect the one struggling with substance abuse.
Right.
It affects the entire family. And so I think, you've heard me say this, I feel like sometimes family members are the forgotten piece of the puzzle, so to speak.
Right.
So that's where my heart is. And that's who I would really like to minister to and reach out to. And I guess you saw that in me and said, oh, you need to be at Renew.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, let me ask you this. This just popped in my head. Would you say that, and you've been in other support groups and stuff like that, do you see more female family members reaching out than male, or is it a good mix? Not that we have any data or studies behind this. I mean, this is just simple observation from your own experience. I've just noticed that in Renew, most of the family members coming through are female family members, and if there's anything to that, if, you know.
Right. Interestingly enough, we do have a lot of women, I think, because the women are the nurturers and the ones that are more in touch maybe with their feelings. Sorry, men.
Yeah.
But, and they want to help figure it out.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Not that the men don't, but the men sometimes are more, I want the facts, I want this fixed, you know.
Tell me what to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if they can't fix it, then it frustrates them. And as we all know in the addiction and recovery world, no one else can fix it.
Right.
So,
it can be a frustrating battle.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see the men as often wanting to dive in to, you know, how do you feel, and you know, all the things that go along with that.
Well, that's just one of the differences between men.
Yes, that's how God made us.
Right, right.
So I do see that now. I do have men that have really struggled as well, and want to kind of get more knowledge, you know, as opposed to more feeling type stuff. They want to get more knowledge about addiction. So we talk about that a lot too.
Absolutely. So there are many families out there, I'm just going to read verbatim, parents, spouses that have a loved one that is addicted to drugs or alcohol. So you have a very personal story of your own son struggling that you love very much. And I know you've spent probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of nights praying for him. So would you mind sharing some of your story, your personal experience with this?
Okay, sure. My son ended up having to have several surgeries at a young age, between middle school, high school, on into college. without going into the whole medical background of it, it roughly was around 9 surgeries with a condition that he had in his, we thought it was in one ankle, and then when they got into it, they found out it was actually in both ankles. So consequently, at that time, pardon me, when doctors were handing out hydros and oxys, you know, thinking they were non-addictive, then, which is a whole different part of the scenario. I feel like now looking back that kind of started this journey for us. And then he went on to college and joined a fraternity, started drinking and doing what some say the normal college stuff is. So during that, we probably had no clue. You know, I look back and there's so much that you didn't know then that you know now that you can speak to, if that makes sense, in our story. But at the time, we were just like, okay, he's making bad choices or whatever. And now looking back, it was a little more than that.
Yeah.
You know, so.
So what is something that you wish that you knew then that you know now? I mean, because that wouldn't necessarily change the outcome per se, but what is something that you wish that you did know then that you know now that you didn't know then?
I guess probably one of the biggest things I wished I would have known is that those pain pills they were giving him for the pain of the surgeries were highly addictive.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
yeah, that happened to a lot of people. Yep.
Thousands and thousands. So as a mom, you know, you don't think about, you want them not to be in pain, so you don't think about it as much, you know.
For sure.
So really, that's probably one of the biggest things
Yeah.
that I wished I would have known, because, you know, he would have just had to deal with some pain and I would have limited them or even kept them with me or whatever,
Right.
you know, needed to happen. But
It's prescribed
God-
by a doctor.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we trust it? You
and you don't want your kid to be suffering when
Well,
his
yeah.
legs ripped open, so to speak.
Right, yeah.
But God has a purpose for everything, so he did allow it.
Sure.
You know,
Yes.
I wished I would have known that there are people that have a propensity to addiction more so than others. Tim Hilton, who came to our conference last year, explains it beautifully about the addicted brain and how Bill can take hydros and Bob can, yeah, Bill and Bob. That's how we. And Bob is like, oh, those make me sick. I don't like them.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to have to take those anymore than I have to. And then Bill's over here going, man, this is the best thing I've ever had.
I know, it gives me energy. I can clean my house. I like people more.
Yeah.
I like my family.
I know. I love everybody.
Yeah. I
know?
enjoy doing anything.
I know,
Yeah,
right? It
I
gives
know.
them that dopamine rush.
Right.
That is just almost like
It's already depleted almost.
what TK calls an allergic reaction almost, you know, in a sense, because it's a totally different reaction than the norm, right? So, you know, in hindsight, those would have been amazing things to know, but you just don't know what you don't know. So,
Sure, yeah.
Since you asked that question, that's probably the two biggest
Those are the two biggest things.
Yes,
Yeah. So how did you feel when you first started to recognize, or was there a moment, a light bulb just kind of went off and you said, my son is struggling as an addict right now?
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
It was really a process. You know, I can think back and see sometimes, but when you're talking about your child, the word addict doesn't just roll off your tongue.
Sure, yeah.
You know, you're talking about your child, so.
Well, it's also not all who they are. It's just something they're struggling with.
And you know
It's
them.
not an identity.
You know how you raised them. We were just a regular, you know, middle of the road family.
Yeah.
Went to church, you know, just a normal family, what you would think, you know. Pardon me. So looking back, I could probably see signs earlier than I did just because I didn't really know what I was seeing. Does that make sense? I would find airplane bottles. We would lift up the couch in the basement and find beer bottles. airplane bottles, for those that don't know, are the little ones that you can buy at the liquor store that are just a
Little
quick
minis.
shot. Yeah. There was one time I can remember my husband asked him to come over and help us do something on our boat, and it was noon, and he was already slurring his words. Those were times when I was just going, wow. I mean, you know, you can just feel it in your gut as a mom.
You don't want to see that.
No, you don't. You don't want to see that.
Yeah.
You're thinking, okay, we might have a problem here. You're still not thinking addict, or I
Right,
wasn't. Anyway,
right,
you know.
right.
So as it progressed and the weight loss became very obvious, the consistency of being high or under the influence was almost every time we saw him nodding off, which is a term used for opioid addicts. They just fall asleep randomly. So then I started educating myself more and realized that my son was an addict. And it's still even hard for me to say to this day, you know, but.
Well, it's also not who he is, period. You know, he's a lot of other things. That's why it's hard for you, because you know that that's not
Right. I know that's
the culmination
not
of who he is.
who God made. God made him in his image.
Right. Amen.
And so I know that's not who he is as a person, but I know that's something now that he struggles with.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you said that, you know, he grew up in the church. You've been going to church. I know that you have been connected into a church for a very long time. How did your church family respond when you started to open up about this and talk about it? And
Well, ironically, it took years for us to even open up about it at all. We don't really deal with a lot of that in our area. I didn't know that in my life. So it was just a foreign world to me, the world of addiction.
were you struggling with like shame or embarrassment or guilt about it?
Shame, guilt, you know, all the things, hurt. Who wants to just, you know, bring something like that up? Hey, I'm Jennifer, my son's an addict. You know, it's just not something that rolls off your tongue real easily. And the church is the safest place for that kind of thing. But, you know, you're also dealing with human beings that can be very judgmental. But God, first of all, I just kept feeling like I need to bring this to the forefront. Well, even before that happened, Nick really started struggling and wanted help. So I'm sure you remember this phone call, but I called Seth Hammond, which is my pastor at Christ Covenant. Shameless plug there. And he connected me with you and said, you know, I have a friend, Sarah, that's your previous job, you know, your previous role in that, and she probably has some good ideas for you. And also at that time, Seth and Adam have grown up together and been good friends, and Adam runs a recovery. So it was just really cool how God worked that out at that particular time. And so I called you, crying, you know. I know you were probably like, what in the world?
No, I did not.
I mean, I know now that you didn't think that, but at the time I was like, she is not understanding a word I am saying, but I was desperate for him and for help. And so you guys connected me, my pastor. That's the beautiful thing about our church being involved with Renew, and churches getting involved with Renew, because you do have people in your congregation that are struggling with this, I promise
Absolutely. A lot of the people coming through our doors are believers.
Yep.
I mean, it's not like...
And they're involved in a church.
Yeah, just because somebody's struggling in active addiction doesn't mean that they are not a Christian.
Right, right.
A lot of them are, and they've lost their way, they've gotten entangled, and they want Christ-centered recovery because they are believers, and they believe that Christ is the one that's going to help them.
Well, they know.
They know.
They know that he's the only one that will do this, because like Nick, he's grown up with that.
And he wanted the same thing.
Right. And he knew that's where it had to come from, is a Christ-centered recovery. So, and that's what Spring to Life is, the one that Adam runs that I told you about, and that's what Renew is. So that's why, you know, I ended up getting involved. However, it was just a wonderful thing that our church was already involved in. I could reach out to our pastor, and then he knew to connect me to you, and then, you know, the story goes from there.
So how has this journey been? I mean, I know that he's been to treatment, and like, you know, what is your experience as a mom walking with your son through recovery? And I know that, you know, just struggling with discouraging times, triumphal times, uncertain times. I mean, it's been a roller coaster ride, right?
Yeah.
It's not been just smooth sailing, you know?
No. I don't know any life that's smooth sailing, first of all.
Right, no.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But it does add a bit of a roller coaster ride just because of the nature of addiction. You know, the highs, the lows, the recovery, the not recovery. And I guess one of the things that I've learned is that I had to get off the crazy train myself. I had to make my life and our family's life healthier by gaining that knowledge that I talked about before, learning more about that world of addiction, and by getting healthy myself, because as a loved one of an addict, you get addicted to the addict and their world and saving them, and or you're walking on eggshells so you won't upset them, so they won't use more or go do something, you know. So your life just gets totally turned upside down and on that roller coaster ride. So, you know, there comes a time when you have to decide to get off. And
So what did that look like for you?
For me, I really...
Like what, like practically look like what was one thing you had to get off of? Like, you know, you talk about like enabling and stuff like that, you know? That can be a crazy train ride, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
We talk about, like, just last Wednesday, we talked about the difference between empathy and enabling. So we can have empathy for them, and we can hurt for them, and we can long for more for them, and we can pray for them. But when you cross that line and try to take care of those things for them, that's when you step into enabling. So empathy is something totally different than enabling, because enabling is a behavior. It's something you're doing. You're buying them gas, you're buying them food, you're giving them money. You know, you're thinking, okay, you know, if he wrecked his car again, we'll just help him get one more car so he can get to work and get better. And, you know, you just play these same scenarios in your head. And so you end up noticing a pattern, you know.
Right.
Hopefully, after doing that for so long, you end up noticing the same pattern over and over. How many cars have we wrecked? How many jobs have we lost?
It's the same song and dance every time.
It
And
is.
so, you know, you talk about helping them be uncomfortable.
Yes.
Do we want them to be comfortable in this dysfunction, in this thing that's killing them? Like, do we want to help them make this work in their addiction, or do we want it to suck?
Right.
As much as possible so that there's change. So what you talk about that a lot. So if you could expand on enabling and stuff.
Well, I think with any child, we want them to be happy. We want them to have a good job. We want all these things. We want them to love the Lord. We want all these things. But how do we get closer to the Lord? Through suffering.
We do.
I mean, I hate to say it, but that's just it. So I feel like addiction a lot of times is just the lack of wanting to suffer for anyone. We don't want to suffer emotionally. We don't want to suffer physically. We don't want to suffer, especially in this day and age. We feel like we're entitled to happiness and a good job and a good life.
Comfort.
Yes, and all the comforts of
Good emotions.
of America.
Yeah.
You know?
It's American for sure.
Oh, buddy. So.
Did you know, by the way, that out of many other cultures in the world, that the American culture is the most easily traumatized there was a cultural anthropologist that did a study on trauma and how different cultures relate to trauma, and America is the most easily traumatized culture. One of the most, should I say, easily traumatized cultures.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
That doesn't surprise me either.
Partially because I was that parent too that walked around with a pillow because I didn't want my kids to get hurt or feel bad, or
Yeah.
you know, I didn't want the pain, so I, you know, allowed him to have pain pills, not knowing they were addictive,
Sure,
obviously,
yeah.
you know, but
It's just what you do.
That's
You're not
right.
supposed to have pain.
that's right, right.
Yeah.
I don't want my child to suffer,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but suffering brings
It might
us
kill
close-
them. Yeah.
But who decides that even?
Right. Right.
Who decides that?
Right.
The Lord created our children in their mother's womb, and it's His life for them. So I tried to take the pen from Him so many times, like wear my junior God badge, as I call it. I'm here to help you, Lord. I know you need me, you know. And He's like, okay, you know, step aside. It's basically the parents or loved ones are getting in the way. I visualize your addicted loved one looking in a mirror, and you're getting in the way of them seeing the truth.
Oh, that's really good.
You know, you're like, okay, I'm here to help you. Okay, let's go. And they're just, you know, the Lord's like, come on, you know,
Get
let
out
me-
of the way.
Let me do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally forgot what your question was in the beginning. Do you remember?
Something about enabling or them helping them to be uncomfortable
Oh, that's right.
in
That's
this
right.
dysfunction.
I
Yeah.
do talk about being uncomfortable because I remember a story that I saw in a video about the sleeping bag. You know, I always talk
Yeah.
about the sleeping bag story
Yeah.
about a gentleman who was very successful, I can't even remember how many degrees, and was doing very well, and got into drugs. I don't know if he specifically told us how, but he was actually living on the streets. Well, he saw this ad for a sleeping bag, and it was unseasonably cold. Like, he was freezing living on the streets. And so he told his mom about this 1999 sleeping bag, and he was like, Mom, you know, I'm freezing out here, please, you know, can you just get the sleeping bag for me? And she was like, you know, no. And he goes, you don't have to give me the money, just go get the sleeping bag and bring it to me. And she still refused, and he, of course, let her have it, which is very typical. Cussed her up one side and down the other. You don't love me, you don't, you know, you're gonna just leave me out here to die or freeze to death, you know, all the things. So, actually, fast forward, he did get into recovery and is sober and actually works at a recovery center now. But he came back to his mom periodically just to bring her his chips or his acknowledgement that he's, you know, still in recovery and still sober. And he said all of a sudden he went one day and there was that same ad on the table of the sleeping bag for $19.99. And so he's like, Mom, you know, why didn't you want to get me that sleeping bag? I mean, it was 19 bucks, you know, 20 bucks. And she said, I did not want you comfortable for one more second in your addiction.
Because I love you too much.
Amen. So actually, that's when he sought help.
Oh, see? Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
And I love that story.
But there's so many of them.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
There's so many.
I just think that one's so cool because I call it sleeping bag story, and it's just so relatable because you don't want your child to freeze, for heaven's sakes.
It goes against our natural, like, inclinations.
Right. Our instincts as a mother,
Our instincts,
but
yes.
even as a person and a believer, we're supposed to help take care of people. I call it living in the opposites because that's what you feel like, that you're living in the opposites.
Yeah.
You know, especially as a Christian.
As your values. When actually, if you really, it feels that way, but actually you're not.
No.
Because the Bible tells us how to deal with these things. And you know,
Jesus set boundaries.
Jesus did set boundaries.
And that's kind of another big thing that I talk about is boundaries. And, you know, it's one thing to help somebody when they have a catastrophe, your house burns down or, you know, something like that happens. But if someone's struggling, you don't pay their rent for the next 6 months necessarily. You know, you help them for that short period of time get back on their feet and get going. But there are family members that have paid the way for their addict for years. And I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
They can't
And
get
we've
it
done
back.
that, not to that tune, because we did, you know, stop at some point, but you feel like, okay, just this one more time.
Yeah.
Just this one more rehab, just this one more phone call.
What would you say to the parent who has a loved one, or a spouse who has a loved one who, but I would say particularly parent, where their child has been in recovery, relapsed, been in recovery, relapsed, been in recovery, and they are discouraged, they are fearful, struggling with why God type of questions and conversations in their mind and heart. What would you say to them?
You know, one of the things we talk about is how God works through recovery. And I really feel like that is crucial, is to hang on to Him and to know His word and know He did not give you the spirit of fear. That's not from Him. And He wants us to have joy. He wants us to have peace. So I would encourage them to find a group. And believe me, the first couple of groups I went to, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not, you know, you think it's so, there's just no way I'm going to be able to sit through these things.
And now you're leading one.
That's not a good plug for me, is it? Yes, and now I'm leading one because I saw the benefits. I stuck with it, even though the first few times I was like,
Yeah.
I stuck with it and I saw the benefits of it. I saw the benefits of people pointing me to Christ and not pointing me to the waves in the ocean that you feel like you're being overcome by. I saw people pointing me to Christ instead of looking at my addict and how to fix him. And I saw people giving me tools to be healthy. It wasn't healthy how I was living and addicted to my addict, you know, or to my son or whatever. And it doesn't even matter if it's an addict. I don't want to be addicted to my daughter. I don't want to be so engulfed in her and her life, or him and his life, that I'm not living my own life in a healthy way. Does that make sense? So it's not always just an addiction thing, but I would just encourage them to find a group that can love on them and a safe place where they can talk about these things. Because, you know, to be honest with you, I didn't really have a lot of people that could understand where I was. You know, people can give you advice all day long and talk to you, but unless they've been there, it's just different. It would be like me advising somebody who's having to go through their second chemo. You know, I don't have a clue. I've never been through that. It would be like me advising somebody who's lost a limb or been in the service, you know, and served our country. I don't have any idea. So I would just encourage them to find a Christ-centered, safe place to meet with people and be able to talk through that and get the tools to be able to lead a healthy life and to have the kind of love for their addicted loved one that they desire, and get off that crazy train, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know that you can do that alone. You know, we're made for community, we're made for relationship, and that's just a different kind of community and relationship that can really foster a healthy life and a joy-filled life. I have joy again, and that's what God desires for me, no matter what my addicted loved one does. He is in recovery now, praise the Lord, but even if he wasn't, you know, I have to do what's best for me, my family, and my relationship with Christ, even if.
I thought about getting a tattoo that says, even so, you know, because there's so many things in life that can be thrown at us, or that we can struggle with even. And just even so, because Christ is constant, Christ is sovereign. It's not like he's up there saying, well, how he got into this mess, what are we going to do now? I mean, he knows the day we're born and the day we're going to die. He knows the whole thing in between, because he's outside the constraints of time. And that is something I can lay my head on at night, you know, regardless of what it looks like. The disciples were in the boat. There was a storm. The storm was raging. Christ was asleep. And they said, Lord, wake up. We're perishing.
Yeah.
Save us, Lord. And oh, you of little faith. Why are you afraid?
Right.
And he spoke one word and everything was calm.
Right.
And so those waves of life, I mean, it's gonna show up in a lot of different ways, a lot of different faces, a lot of different scenarios. But if we keep our eyes on Christ, you know, when Peter got out of the boat and he was walking to Christ, he was walking on the water as he's walking to Christ. And the moment he took his eyes off and he looked back, he began to sink. But it's not like he just went to the bottom. Yeah. You know, Jesus picked him up.
There's a good ending to that.
There's a good ending to that as well. So our flesh will happen.
Right.
It's not like because we're Christians or because we're in Christ, you know, we're supposed to be super people and we never feel fear or discouragement. It's going to happen. But what do we do when it happens?
Right.
You know?
And how do we act upon that? You know, I keep a journal called Between Tears and Trust for this particular journey. And, you know, trust comes up a lot, you know. Do you trust me? You know, oh, we trust the Lord. We trust in him. You know, you say that a lot. And then I just felt him looking at me like, do you really? You know, do you? Why are you trying to take the pen? Why are you sticking your junior God badge on? You know, I mean, it's like, do you really?
Yeah. It's cool how God speaks to us all differently too.
Yeah.
I've noticed that every time somebody says, like, whenever God's speaking to them, it's a different personality. It's like how they can receive it.
Yeah.
It's like how God will specifically.
In my humanness.
Yeah.
You know, he's probably like, no, that's really not.
He's like, really? I have a friend, and every time she's doing something that she shouldn't be doing, and God speaks to her in her heart, it's always with an attitude, like, oh, you want to do it your own way, huh? You know? It's just like, so there's always like a different kind of personality, but it's God. He's the God of all of us, and he knows how to speak to us. I love that. I just thought of that.
We love that about him, don't we?
Yeah. So how's your relationship with your son now? How are things going?
Well, like I said, he is in recovery.
Yeah.
He has made a 13-month commitment at the place that he's at now. So that's a long time in the recovery world. You know, the 30, 60, 90, you know, a kind of scenario. We were past that. So been there, done that.
Right.
Got the T-shirt.
Right.
But for us, for him specifically, he made the choice to go somewhere long-term, to really give, you know, without going into too much detail about the brain and all that, wanted to give his brain time to heal and those neurotransmitters to reconnect and make new pathways to where his body isn't telling him, you have to have this drug to survive, because that's what eventually happens.
It puts you into survival.
Right.
For the drug. Yeah.
It'd be like
Physically
me
survival.
sitting food there and you have gone a week without food and you walk in, I'm like, you can't have that.
Yeah.
Their body tells them different. Their brain tells them different.
Right. I mean, think about how strong that urge is. I mean, and the craving for a drug is actually stronger than that.
Right.
Exponentially.
Right.
And so you're right, and he's right. You got to put some space because over time it won't be that powerful.
Right.
Like, it won't be that powerful forever. You know, you'll begin to learn how to enjoy other things, and so it won't be as magnified in the mind.
Right.
You know,
your brain isn't constantly telling you have to have that to survive.
Right.
It's giving your brain almost just like truly time to heal and enjoy things again without having to have that dopamine rush way up here. You can enjoy things, chocolate.
Yeah.
You know, so that's another podcast on the brain or whatever.
Well, it reminds me of like people who are fasting, like doing a Daniel fast. So they can't have any sugar, any, you know, dairy, anything like that. And so apples are like a decadence. Whenever people are going through a Daniel fast, apples or oranges or something, they're like, oh, it's like a dessert.
Right.
Because you've deprived yourself of these other things that bring you more pleasure, physically, like with all the sugar rush. It gives you a bigger sugar rush. When you take those out of the equation, you start to enjoy the things that are actually better for you.
And what do you want
nourish
more? What do you want more than anything than a time when you can't have those things? You want exactly what you can't have.
Yeah. Well, Paul talks about it in Romans 7. I mean, that struggle is real, and every human can relate, whether you've been in an addiction or not.
I don't think people realize, though, that that's about a 3, on the scale, when theirs is almost 100 times. I mean, it's to your core, as in your body aches. There's so much more even physical to it.
Sure.
So we can equate it to food because that's all we know, or whatever other things, bring you joy, being with your kids or whatever. But it's not on the same level.
Sure. Yeah, it's not. So last question,
okay,
and then we'll wrap it up. What would you say to parents right now, or to family members, spouses that just found out that their loved one is using and has an addiction?
I guess one of the main things that I would say is, if you're involved in a church, maybe reach out to someone in your church to see if they know of a group or a person that they could talk to, and just kind of start that conversation with someone. Don't be ashamed. Don't be, we want to break that stigma. We want to talk about it, and the more we talk about it, the more healing can happen. And I know that even for that particular person, it's devastating when you first find out, or maybe not even find out, but you just kind of come to the realization yourself. You've known it, you've seen it, but you're just not ready to admit it to yourself. So reach out to someone in your church, look for Renew Clinic or Christ-centered type recovery places that may have some people that you can talk to. I know we have phone calls from family members all the time. They can come in. We have a couple of people now that are coming in to talk to TK to just see what the next steps are, or what's, if there is anything that can be done. Because sometimes there are things that can be done. If they're under your roof, you can say, I'm not going to live this way anymore, and just find some people that can help you do that, and help you take those next steps and make those hard choices.
Sure.
So that's probably the biggest thing. Find a support group, as horrific as it may sound at first. There's nothing like them, and it's a safe place. So we need that community with each other for that reason. So that's probably the biggest thing I'd say, is reach out. Reach out to somebody that gets it, that understands, because that's why we're here. That's why we're news here. And I can't speak for other treatment centers or places, but I know that's why they're here. But the Christ-centered piece is just crucial for recovery.
I agree. Totally agree. Jennifer, thank you.
You're so welcome.
It's been a joy talking with you, and thank you for being willing to share with others what you've been through with your son. And I know that's not easy, and you're brave, and I thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks.
This has been Waging War. Thanks for fighting alongside us this week.